If you're hearing this, then you already know something isn't right. I don't know how much time I have before this signal cuts out, so listen carefully. The regular stations have gone silent, the news channels have stopped broadcasting, and what little information we're getting, it doesn't make sense. The government isn't telling us everything. I've been on air for hours now, trying to make sense of it myself. No warnings, no lead up, just a sudden nationwide lockdown. Streets emptied overnight. Phones are still working, for now, but the internet? Spotty at best. And it's not just outages. Some websites, the kind that should never go dark, are just gone. I don't want to scare you, but the pieces don't add up. We're told to stay inside, but no one will say why. We're told to remain calm, but they won't tell us what we're supposed to be afraid of. And then there's the silence, a kind of stillness that feels too deliberate, too absolute. Stay with me. I'll tell you what I know. It started without warning. No explosions, no sirens, just a quiet announcement repeating on every available channel. For your safety, remain indoors until further notice. No further details. No timeline. People thought it was a drill at first, some kind of cybersecurity threat. But the longer the silence stretched, the clearer it became. This was no drill. They locked everything down overnight. Schools, businesses, entire cities. Roads closed, public transport halted, and yet, no one in uniform to enforce it. Just an invisible force dictating where we could and couldn't go. People tried to leave their homes, but no one got far. Some found their roads blocked by unmarked vans, others by barricades that appeared as if from nowhere. The lucky ones were simply turned back. The unlucky ones, well, let's just say I haven't heard from them again. We've had lockdowns before. For weather, for security threats, but never like this. This isn't just precaution. This is containment. And the question we should all be asking is containment of what? I don't trust the news anymore. Not because they're lying, because they're not saying anything at all. One by one, major networks went dark. First, they were just experiencing technical difficulties. Then they were undergoing maintenance. And then nothing. No news anchors, no reporters. Just the same government-issued message on repeat. But before they vanished completely, something strange happened. Some stations started contradicting each other. One claiming it was a cyber attack, another mentioning a biological concern, and a third whispering about unidentified activity. It was like they were scrambling for answers, just like the rest of us. And then, just like that, they were gone. Who decides what we get to know? And more importantly, who decided we weren't supposed to know anything at all? The sirens started around midnight. Faint at first, far off, like a storm warning in the distance. But they never got closer, never passed through. Just this eerie, wailing sound carrying over the wind, going on for hours. No ambulances, no fire trucks, just sirens, blaring into the night with no apparent source. People called in, asking if anyone else could hear them. Some swore they saw emergency lights flickering between buildings, but when they looked again, nothing. Like they had imagined it. And then, suddenly, the siren stopped. Not faded, stopped. It's been quiet ever since. Too quiet. And I don't think we're alone. I just got a call from a listener. He's shaken, barely able to get the words out. He says he saw something. Something that shouldn't be happening. Unmarked military vehicles rolling through his neighborhood in the dead of night. No sirens, no flashing lights, just a silent convoy, moving with eerie precision. But that's not the strange part. There were no drivers, no visible soldiers, just these armored trucks gliding down the street as if remote controlled. He tried to get a closer look. He swears he saw movement inside, but not the kind he expected. Something shifting, too fast, too unnatural. And then, as soon as he blinked, The trucks were gone, not turned a corner, not driven away, just gone. I asked if anyone else saw them. He hesitated. Said his neighbors saw something too. Said they packed their bags and left before sunrise. I asked where they went. He said they didn't tell him. I asked if they made it. He hung up. The first official statement came at exactly 3 a.m. No live press conference, no government officials standing at a podium, just a pre-recorded message that interrupted every active broadcast. The voice was flat, emotionless, almost artificial. A precautionary lockdown is now in effect. Due to a national security concern, remain indoors. Do not attempt to leave your residence until further notice. That was it. No explanation, no time frame, no reassurance. People waited for a follow-up, an update, a spokesperson, some kind of detail to explain what was happening. But nothing came. Hours passed. The same message played on loop. By morning, panic had set in. The lack of information was worse than the warning itself. Was it a terror threat? A biological attack? A military operation? No one knew. Some tried calling emergency lines, but dispatchers weren't answering. A few scattered reports suggested the police had been given orders not to respond to civilian concerns. And then there was the power grid failure in several cities, adding another layer of confusion. Was this part of the lockdown? Or something else entirely? People don't fear what they understand. They fear the unknown. And right now, everything about this felt like a void of uncertainty. In those first few hours, the media was just as confused as the public. Some networks tried to reassure viewers, saying it was a precautionary measure. Others speculated it was a cyber attack, some sort of digital warfare crippling national security systems. And then there were the wild theories, a massive gas leak, an airborne virus, even talk of foreign intervention. But every station seemed to have a different version of the truth. It became clear that no one had a cohesive explanation. Not the reporters, not the experts they interviewed, not even the government officials who were supposed to be in control. But then something strange happened. Live broadcasts started cutting out mid-sentence. Interviews with analysts were suddenly rescheduled. News anchors who had pushed for answers were abruptly replaced with pre-recorded segments. And before long, the speculation was gone entirely. One by one, networks fell in line, playing the same scripted government message, word for word. The shift wasn't natural. It was controlled. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a security threat. It was a narrative being shaped in real time. Not everyone was willing to stay quiet. A man, I won't say his name, reached out to me directly. Said he worked inside a classified government facility and had access to information the public wasn't meant to hear. I asked him what he knew. He took a deep breath. Then, in a low, measured voice, he said something I'll never forget. This isn't a lockdown. It's containment. I asked him what that meant. He hesitated, then whispered, "They found something. Something they don't understand. And now it's out." He wouldn't explain further, only that military units had been deployed nationwide. But not to enforce the lockdown. They were responding to something else. He gave me one last warning before hanging up. Whatever happens next, don't trust the official story, and don't go outside. And then the call cut to static. I tried calling back. The line was dead. I don't know what's happening out there, but someone, somewhere, does. And they're making sure we never find out. A man just called in. His voice was shaking, and I don't think it was from the cold. He said he saw something that doesn't make sense. Black helicopters, silent, moving in formation, over his city, gliding through the night like shadows. No flashing lights, no sound, nothing but their dark outlines cutting across the sky. He wasn't the only one. More calls are coming in, people reporting the same thing from different parts of the country. These helicopters aren't patrolling. They're searching. He tried to follow them, weaving through empty streets, staying in the shadows. They moved toward a large residential block, hovering for a moment as if scanning the buildings. And then, without warning, they vanished, not flew away, not dimmed into the distance, just gone. I asked him if he was sure, if maybe they had just turned off their lights, if maybe he had lost sight of them. He swore on his life. 1 second they were there, the next it was like they had never existed. Now he's afraid to go back home. He thinks they saw him. I told him to stay on the line. A few seconds later, the call dropped. A nurse from a major city hospital just reached out. She said she wasn't supposed to talk about this, that she could lose her job, or worse, but she couldn't stay quiet. Last night, before the lockdown was announced, they got an order, a sudden and immediate evacuation of multiple hospital wings. Patients were taken out in the middle of the night, rushed into unmarked ambulances. No sirens, no records, just gone. She checked the system later. Their files had been wiped. Not discharged, not transferred, deleted, like they had never been admitted in the first place. She asked one of the senior doctors what was happening. He didn't answer, just shook his head, mumbled something under his breath, and walked away. That's when she knew something was terribly wrong. Some of those patients weren't even critical. They were there for routine checkups, minor surgeries. Why take them? Why erase them? And here's the worst part. She tried calling one of them. The number had been disconnected. She told me she would try to get more information. But as soon as she said that, she cut herself off. I heard a sharp breath, a shuffle, and then she whispered, "Someone's at my door." The call ended. He was one of the first to ask the right questions. A journalist from an independent news outlet, digging into government briefings, questioning inconsistencies. He had sources, people inside agencies who were willing to talk until they weren't. One by one, they stopped answering. That didn't stop him. He tracked reports of a facility in a remote location, something that wasn't on any public records, but showed up in a few accidentally leaked budget documents. No name, no explanation, just a large allocation of funds labeled Containment Operations. Last night, he sent a message to a colleague. 4 words, "I found it, leaving now." That was the last anyone heard from him. His car was found abandoned on the side of an empty road leading out of town. The engine was still running. The doors were unlocked. His phone was on the dashboard, open to a voice recording, but the file was corrupted. His office was cleared out by morning. His articles removed from the website, his press credentials revoked. It's like he never existed. I'm saying his name now because if I don't, no one will. If you're out there, if you can hear this, please let us know you're okay. If you can't, then we already know what happened. None of this adds up. The helicopters, the missing patients, the journalist who vanished before he could publish his findings. Someone is controlling this. Someone is making sure we never get the truth. I've been watching social media. People are desperate for answers. Some think this is a coordinated military operation, an exercise in mass control. Others swear it's a biological threat, that the missing patients were infected with something. Then there are the ones who say this has been planned for years, that this is the beginning of something much larger, something we were never meant to stop. The problem is, we have no way to know what's real and what's paranoia, and maybe that's the point, because fear makes people easier to control. And if we're too busy distrusting each other, questioning every whisper, every news report, every call for help, then they've already won. I don't know what's coming next, but I can feel it. And if you're listening, so can you. The first reports came in around midnight, then more. By sunrise, it was undeniable. Entire cities were going dark. At first, it seemed like rolling blackouts. Temporary. An inconvenience, nothing more. But then power grids in major metropolitan areas failed, one after another. Streets once glowing with streetlights, office towers, and digital billboards were now swallowed by blackness. No warning, no explanation, just silence. People assumed it was part of the lockdown, a power-saving measure, but then the backup generators failed. Hospitals, government buildings, everything. And something else was wrong. Even places that shouldn't have lost power. Secure facilities, emergency centers went dark. Those locations are supposed to be protected against failures like this, but they weren't. I got a call from a listener outside of Chicago. He said he watched as an entire section of the city lost power in an instant, like someone had flipped a switch. Everything beyond his window, gone. When he stepped outside, the air felt heavier. A low, humming pressure, deep in his bones. Then his call dropped. I tried reaching back, but his number, just like the lights, was gone. If you're listening to this, you're one of the lucky ones. People are losing their connections. First their internet, then their phone lines. Some tried switching to emergency frequencies, but even those are falling silent. One caller told me he managed to reach a friend in another state just before his phone cut off. The friend had been tracking social media reports, watching the news collapse in real time. First, the major networks stopped updating, then independent journalists started vanishing from their feeds. By the time he realized what was happening, he couldn't send messages anymore. This isn't just a power outage, it's an information blackout. Someone or something is making sure we can't reach each other. A truck driver heading west told me he noticed something strange. Traffic signals, radio towers, anything linked to communication were being taken offline first. Then he saw the barricades, rows of them, blocking roads in and out of major cities. No personnel, no police, just empty vehicles left behind, like someone abandoned them in a hurry. He tried to turn around, but his radio cut out. Then his GPS, then his engine. I never got to hear what happened next. His call went dead. A woman called in an hour ago, her voice shaking. She said there's something in the skies, not military helicopters, not search and rescue teams. These are drones, but not the kind we've seen before. They move differently, too fast, too quiet. She swears one hovered outside her apartment for nearly an hour. No lights, no sound, just watching. When she worked up the courage to step outside, it moved before she even took her first step. Another caller from a rural town said he saw a fleet of them, weaving between trees, scanning houses. He ran inside and pulled his curtains closed, but he felt them, waiting. Then something terrifying happened. He pointed his flashlight at one, just to see if it would react. It did. It turned toward him instantly, as if it had been waiting for him to acknowledge it. Then it moved. Not like a machine, but like it had purpose. He dropped his flashlight. When he looked back up, the drone was gone. No one knows what they're looking for, but the real question is, what happens when they find it? I wasn't sure whether to play this next part. It came from an encrypted file, a message intercepted from a government frequency. I don't know how it got out. I don't know if I'm putting myself in danger by playing it, but people need to hear it. The voice is distorted, but the urgency is clear. It's a man. Government insider, maybe. You can hear him breathing heavily, speaking in short, panicked bursts. This isn't a lockdown. He pauses. There's a rustling noise like he's looking over his shoulder. Then, containment failed. A mechanical beep. A moment of silence. Then, they don't know they're compromised. His voice gets lower, more desperate. If they tell you to open the door, don't. If they tell you it's safe, run. The recording cuts to static. I tried playing it again, but the file was gone, erased, like it never existed. And the worst part? I don't know who he was warning us about. A caller, let's call him Daniel, reached out last night. Said he saw something that didn't sit right with him. He was driving outside the city, just after sunset, when he spotted a military convoy. He counted at least 10 vehicles, armored trucks, blacked out SUVs, even a transport loaded with something covered by a thick tarp. They were moving fast, heading toward a location that, as far as he knew, didn't exist on any map. Curiosity got the better of him. He turned his truck around and followed, at a distance. They took an unmarked road leading into the woods. No signs, no checkpoints, just pavement disappearing into darkness. Then something strange happened. His radio crackled. His GPS failed. His headlights flickered. He got a sudden, intense pressure in his skull, like the air had shifted. He pulled over for just a moment, rubbed his temples, tried to shake it off. And when he looked back up, the convoy was gone. No tire tracks, no lingering dust, just an empty road. He went back the next morning. There was nothing there. No road, no facility, just an unbroken stretch of forest. I asked him if he was sure. His voice dropped to a whisper. I know what I saw, and they don't want us to find it again. People are turning on each other. With power out, communication cut, and no answers from the government. Fear has taken over. Grocery stores have been stripped bare. Water and canned food, gone. Pharmacies looted, gas stations emptied. People are fighting over bread. Neighbors who once borrowed sugar from each other are barricading their doors. Every man for himself. A woman called in earlier, said she saw something chilling. A family with 2 young kids trying to buy supplies, only to be surrounded by a group of desperate men. They didn't ask. They took. She tried to step in. One of the men looked at her. Not with anger, not with guilt, with hunger. She turned and walked away. Even outside of major cities, it's getting worse. Small towns, once safe havens, are locking down. A caller from a rural county said people are forming militias, blocking roads, demanding identification. Anyone who isn't from here isn't welcome. This isn't a lockdown anymore. It's survival of the fittest. And the question no one wants to ask is, how much worse is it going to get? The missing reports are piling up. It started with individual cases. A friend who never made it home. A coworker who stopped replying to texts. But now, whole households are disappearing. A caller, let's call her Emma, said she checked in on her elderly neighbor this morning. His front door was wide open. The porch light was still on. His breakfast half eaten on the table. But he was gone. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away. Another story. A man came home from a supply run to find his wife and 2 kids missing. Their coats still hanging by the door, their shoes in the hallway. It was like they had just stepped away for a moment, but they never came back. It's not looters, it's not mass panic, it's something else. Here's the most disturbing part. In some cases, entire streets are reporting the same thing. Multiple houses, multiple families, all vanishing at once. I keep wondering, where are they going? Or maybe the better question is, who's taking them? I'm starting to wonder if I should still be doing this. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but my hands are shaking. My signal shouldn't still be up. Other stations have gone dark. Other broadcasters have stopped transmitting. Either I'm incredibly lucky, or someone wants me to keep talking. I've been watching the street outside my building. There used to be cars, people, movement. But in the past hour, it's been nothing but silence. I know there are still people out there. But why aren't they leaving? Why aren't they running? Something isn't right. Every time I blink, I feel like the walls are closing in. A few minutes ago, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I told myself it was just someone passing by. But the sound stopped right outside my door. I haven't moved since. I'm too afraid to look. I keep telling myself I should keep talking, that people need to hear this. But what if I'm the only one left? People can only live in fear for so long before something inside them snaps. Without answers, without leadership, it was only a matter of time before order collapsed. At first, it was subtle. Neighbors avoiding each other, locking their doors a little earlier, speaking in hushed tones. Then came the distrust, accusations, fights breaking out over food, over medicine, over nothing at all. I got a call from a man in a small town. Said his community tried to keep things together, tried to believe the government would fix this. But when the power didn't come back, when the broadcast turned to static, that belief crumbled. He told me about a family on his street. Good people, kept to themselves. One night, someone heard whispers, accusations that they were hiding something. The next morning, their house was burned to the ground. No one saw who did it. No one admitted to lighting the fire. But when the smoke cleared, no one asked where the family had gone either. This is how it happens. Fear replaces reason. Paranoia spreads faster than any virus. The people who should be standing together turn on each other instead. And when that happens, the real danger isn't outside. It's the people you thought you could trust. A man called in earlier, voice shaking, said he went to check on his elderly neighbor this morning, only to find her apartment exactly as she left it. Her keys were still on the counter. Her dinner, half eaten, sat cold on the table. Even her slippers were by the door like she had just stepped out for a moment. But she hadn't. She was gone. He knocked on other doors. No one had seen her leave. She didn't have family nearby. No one who would have picked her up in the middle of the night. And there were no signs of a break-in, no signs of a struggle, just absence. He called the police. No answer. Tried the building manager. Same thing. When he checked her apartment later that evening, someone had cleared the table, put away the dishes, folded the blanket on her chair, but no one had been inside. I asked if she had mentioned anything strange before disappearing. He hesitated before answering. Said she had been hearing noises at night, whispering from the vents, soft knocking from inside the walls. She thought it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But if that were true, where did she go? And more importantly, who cleaned up after her? A mother called in, crying. Said her little boy has been seeing someone. They live on the top floor of a high-rise. The door's locked, windows sealed. There shouldn't be anyone else there. And yet, every night, her son tells her the same thing. Mommy, the man in the walls is watching again. At first, she thought it was just a child's imagination. The stress of the lockdown. The fear bleeding into his dreams. But then things started happening. She'd wake up in the middle of the night to find her son standing by the vent, whispering, his tiny fingers tracing the metal slats like he was feeling for something. She asked him what he was doing. He told me to listen. She tried to brush it off, but then the noises started, soft scratching behind the walls, the hum of something shifting just beyond sight. One night she put her ear to the vent. She heard breathing. She grabbed her son and left the apartment that night. She hasn't gone back, but the worst part, she's not the only one who's called about it. A truck driver called in earlier, said he'd been on the road when he came across a military checkpoint. Nothing unusual about that, except for the way the soldiers stood there. No insignia, no unit patches, just black uniforms. Faces unreadable behind dark visors. They weren't stopping cars, they weren't giving orders. They were just standing. He slowed down, rolled his window down, asked if the road was clear. No answer. One of the soldiers turned his head slightly, like he was listening, but not to him. He asked again. Nothing. No movement, no acknowledgement. Just that same eerie stillness. He watched another car in front of him hesitate, then slowly drive through. The soldiers didn't stop it, didn't even look at it, like it wasn't there. He was about to follow when something strange happened. One of them, without turning, without signaling to anyone else, stepped into the road directly in his path. Not aggressively, not like a warning, just standing there blocking him. He didn't wait to find out what would happen next. He threw the truck in reverse and got out of there. But when he checked his rearview mirror, they were all gone. No checkpoint. No soldiers. Nothing but an empty road. I've been getting calls all night. People hearing things that shouldn't be there. One woman said it started a few nights ago. Soft footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. She thought maybe a neighbor couldn't sleep, but the sound never faded, never moved past her door. Just circled, over and over. Another caller, lives alone, top floor of a building, swears someone knocked on his bedroom window. Not his front door, his window, 7 stories up. And then there's the family in a suburban neighborhood. Every night at 3 a.m. they hear whispers outside. Not talking, not full sentences, just fragments. The father finally worked up the courage to look. No one was there. But as soon as he stepped away, the whispering started again. Closer, inside the house, he checked on his kids, his wife. Everyone was asleep. And yet, the whispers kept coming. They haven't slept since, and they're not the only ones. Because if you listen, really listen, you'll hear it too. The isolation is getting to people. A man called in last night. Said he was sitting in his darkened living room, watching the street outside. Everything was quiet, still. Then he saw a figure standing just beyond the streetlight's glow. Motionless, too tall, too thin. He blinked. It was gone. Another caller, former radio technician, says he keeps hearing voices on dead channels. Not static, not interference, voices, garbled, distorted, saying things that sound like names. Then there's the woman who works nights at an old hotel. She told me she caught something on the security feed. A guest walking into the elevator. The doors closed. The elevator never went anywhere. The doors opened again. No one was inside. People are seeing things, hearing things. Maybe it's just stress. Maybe it's the mind filling in the silence. Or maybe there's something out there that doesn't want to be seen. People are grasping for answers. I get messages, theories, warnings. Everyone has their own version of what's happening. Some say it's mind control, that something's been released, something altering perception, twisting reality, making people see what they shouldn't. Others insist it's a biological experiment gone wrong, that the missing people aren't missing. They've been changed, and the government is trying to cover it up. Then there are those who say this was planned from the beginning, that the lockdown isn't to protect us, but to keep us contained. That something has been moving among us for weeks, and now finally we're starting to notice. The worst part, none of them sound crazier than what we've already seen. And if this is all just paranoia, just fear twisting our minds, then why did I just get an email from a government domain that doesn't exist? And why did it only contain one word? Run. The signal cut out for a moment. When it came back, there was a voice. Low, urgent, breathing heavy. I don't have much time. You need to listen. I didn't recognize him. No introduction, no explanation. Just a man who sounded like he'd been running for his life. They aren't telling you the truth, he said, because the truth is worse than the fear. I tried to ask who he was, but he talked over me, voice sharp with desperation. He wasn't calling to chat. He was calling to warn. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. The lockdown, it was a last resort. They thought they could contain it. They were wrong. I asked what he meant. What were they trying to contain? What did they think they could stop? There was a pause, a sharp breath. Then, look outside. I couldn't. You don't see them yet, he whispered, but they see you. Then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he was gone. The line went dead. And the worst part? I don't think he was talking about the government. For weeks, they let us believe this was planned, that this was under control. But the caller, the scientist, or whatever he was, he said the lockdown wasn't meant to happen. Not like this. He said something went wrong. The government had protocols in place, contingencies for every kind of disaster, biological threats, cyber warfare, mass unrest. But whatever this is, this wasn't in their playbook. The lockdown wasn't about stopping something. It was about buying time. I asked him time for what? For them to figure out what the hell this is. I don't know what's worse. The idea that they've been lying to us, or the idea that they don't even know what they're dealing with. The caller kept saying the same thing, that they waited too long, that they should have acted sooner, that by the time they realized how bad it was already everywhere. I asked him what it was. He hesitated. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. It's not a virus. This isn't a pandemic. It's something worse. The scientist, he said they found something in the population. A mutation. An anomaly. Something never seen before. They didn't understand it at first. It wasn't airborne. It wasn't bacterial. It wasn't even alive in the way we understand. It doesn't spread, he said. It waits. It doesn't infect people. It changes them. I asked him what he meant. How does it work? How do we stop it? He exhaled sharply. That's the problem, he said. They don't realize they've changed, and neither do the people around them. I felt my throat tighten. What happens when they realize? I asked. He didn't answer. Then the line went dead, and for the first time since all of this started, I felt truly afraid. The scientist's voice had dropped to a whisper. I could barely hear him over the static. Those infected don't realize they've changed. I waited for him to continue, heart pounding in my chest, and neither do the people around them, until it's too late. He told me they ran tests, hundreds of them. At first, the infected showed no symptoms, no fever, no rash, no neurological decay. Nothing. They spoke the same, moved the same, thought they were the same. Then something would shift. Subtle things. A phrase repeated just a little too often, a glance held a second too long, a hesitation. Before answering a question, they should have known instantly. The worst part, he said, they don't even know when it happens. One test subject, a woman, had been kept in isolation for weeks. The researchers spoke with her every day. She laughed, cried, begged for answers. She was normal. Then one morning, she asked why they were keeping her there. Said she had just arrived. She'd been there for 3 months. She looked down at her own hands like they belonged to someone else. And then she smiled. The scientist's voice cracked. They're still human, but something else is underneath. He told me there was proof. He'd been collecting documents, files stamped as classified, wiped from official records. He said the government knew weeks ago. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. They thought they could track it, quarantine it. They were wrong. I heard rustling over the line, the sound of papers being shuffled. Then, his breathing quickened. I need you to listen carefully, he said. If I disappear, people need to know the truth. He started reading. An internal report from the CDC. Symptoms do not present immediately. Subjects remain unaware of cognitive shifts. A leaked memo from Homeland Security. Phase 3 containment failed. Public disclosure is not an option. And then, his voice dropped to a near whisper. Emergency directive issued. Select urban centers are being prepared for... He stopped. I asked him what it said. Nothing. Silence. Then, they're here. The call cut off. I tried to call back. The number was gone. I don't know if he ran, or if he never got the chance. I started looking into the places he mentioned. The towns where the first cases had been reported. The communities where people had started acting differently. They're gone. Not just the people, the towns themselves. They've been wiped from satellite images. Street views no longer exist. The businesses that used to be there, scrubbed from online directories. Like they were never there. A caller from the Midwest told me about a town he used to drive through every week. 2 days ago, he stopped at a gas station just outside of it. This morning, he went back. The road was still there, the turnoff still there. But the town, nothing. Just miles of empty fields. No rubble, no burnt remains. Just absence. I asked if he was sure. If maybe he had taken the wrong exit. He swore he hadn't. He showed a coworker his GPS history. The town name was still there, but the map showed nothing. If it was just one place, I could believe it was a mistake. But it's not just one. It's happening everywhere. My hands are shaking. I've been sitting here repeating the same words over and over, trying to make sense of it. Entire towns erased. People changing without knowing. Governments covering it up. And me, still broadcasting. Why? Other stations have gone dark. Every news outlet has fallen silent. But I'm still here. Either I'm lucky, or someone wants me to keep talking. I keep glancing at the window, at the reflection staring back at me. It's just me. It's always just me. But now I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me from the other side. A moment ago, I swear I heard something move behind me. I turned, but the room was empty, wasn't it? I need to stop. I need to... Oh, wait, there's someone standing outside the studio. They're not knocking. They're just waiting. I think they're listening. And I think they know that I know. The government has failed. The news is gone. The world outside is unrecognizable. And yet people are fighting back. Scattered reports suggest a growing underground network. Groups of survivors who have stopped waiting for answers and started taking action. These aren't militias or looters. They're people who have realized the truth. No one is coming to save them. I got a message from a listener who managed to escape a quarantine zone. She said there are safe houses now, homes marked with strange symbols, invisible to the untrained eye, offering shelter, supplies, and information. A resistance forming in the shadows. A man called in from the outskirts of a city. His group intercepted a government transmission, coded messages about safe extraction zones. But here's the thing. Those locations don't exist on any public record. Are these real evacuation points? Or something else? Some survivors are moving towards them, desperate for any way out. Others believe it's a trap. One thing is certain. The government isn't in control anymore. And if they aren't the ones running things, then who is? A new voice broke through the static tonight. A scientist, panicked, desperate. They didn't say their name, didn't say where they were, but their message was clear. I know how to stop this. I pressed for details. What is it? A virus? A parasite? Something worse? They hesitated. Then, it's rewriting them. But not just them. Us too. Slowly, subtly. The changes are already happening. I asked how we stop it. I need access, they said. There's a facility, government controlled, highly restricted. Inside, there's research, the original case files. If I can get to them, I can figure out how this started. And if I can do that, I might be able to end it. But they don't have clearance. No one does anymore. The facility was shut down when the lockdown began, sealed off. I asked what they would do if they couldn't get in. Silence. Then, quietly. Then it won't stop. Not ever. The transmission ended before I could ask anything else. I don't know if they'll call back. I don't know if they'll get the chance. A truck driver called in. He was making his way out of a locked-down city, following a route he had taken 100 times before. Then he saw it. A checkpoint. Nothing unusual at first. Barricades, abandoned government vehicles. The kind of blockade you'd expect in an emergency, but something was wrong. The engines were still running. Doors flung open, radios crackling with static, food half eaten on the ground, papers fluttering in the wind. It was as if everyone there had just stepped away. He got out of his truck, calling out. No answer. He checked the cars, the checkpoints, the empty security booths. Nothing. Not a single body. It wasn't an ambush. It wasn't looters. It was like they had been erased. And then, just as he was about to leave, he heard something. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. But when he turned, there was nothing. He drove straight through the checkpoint without stopping. He told me he checked the mirrors once. Only once. And in that brief second, he swears he saw them. Figures standing in the road, watching him go. A caller reached out tonight. Said he used to work for the government. Nothing high level. Just another faceless employee pushing paperwork. But he heard things. And he remembers everything. He whispered about a transit system beneath the city. A network of tunnels built for emergencies. Ones not marked on any public map. Originally designed for evacuations, they were sealed off years ago, deemed obsolete. But he doesn't think they were shut down. A month before the lockdown, he overheard something. A conversation between men in suits that didn't match their badges. They weren't discussing closure. They were discussing activation. He tried to dig deeper, but his access was revoked. His office was cleared out overnight. No explanation, no transfer, just erased. I asked him if the tunnels still exist. He hesitated before answering. If you know where to look, he said, they're still there. But the entrances, those have been sealed for security reasons. Security. That's the word they always use. I asked him if anyone had gone in. He exhaled sharply. Then, no one who came back talks about it. And now I can't stop wondering, was it built for evacuation? Or was it built to keep something inside? A message appeared in my inbox. No sender. No traceable IP. Just a single subject line. You have to warn them. Attached was a document. Top secret clearance. Government insignia. I don't know how real it is, but if it's fake, it's the most convincing forgery I've ever seen. The file contained a phrase I haven't seen before. Directive ECHO01. A protocol. A last resort. It describes something called a full reset. Not containment. Not evacuation. Erasure. Entire zones wiped out. Cities, towns. Everything erased from maps, records, memory. A clean slate. A controlled burn. I scanned the document, looking for a trigger. What would make them resort to this? One sentence stood out, highlighted in red. If primary countermeasures fail, Echo 01 is to be executed before phase transition occurs. Phase transition. I don't know what that means. But if they're considering erasing entire cities to stop it, then whatever's happening hasn't even reached its final stage. I keep asking myself the same question. If they're willing to erase entire populations just to keep this thing contained, what does that mean for the rest of us? Are we already too late? Every route out of major cities is blocked. The power grid is failing in waves. Planned or uncontrolled, I don't know. Communications are breaking down. The people who knew too much have gone silent. And those who are left, we're talking in whispers. A listener told me something chilling. Said they saw a convoy of unmarked trucks heading toward a deserted area. Empty land, no cities, no infrastructure. They weren't delivering supplies. They were setting something up. If we're watching them, they're watching us. And if they think the only solution is to reset everything, then maybe we were never supposed to make it out. I was about to end the broadcast. I needed a break, time to process everything. My mind was racing, my hands shaking. Then the signal cut out. For a moment, just silence. Then a voice, mechanical, cold, devoid of emotion. Emergency alert in effect. Remain calm. Do not attempt to leave your residence. It repeated, over and over. The exact same tone, the exact same pause between words, like it wasn't meant to be heard, just obeyed. I tried overriding it. Nothing. Tried switching frequencies. Nothing. Then something changed. A flicker of distortion in the voice. A split-second pause where there shouldn't have been one. And in that pause, something else broke through. A whisper barely audible beneath the static. You are not alone. Then the alert resumed, crisp, unbroken. Remain calm. Do not attempt to leave your residence. I don't know what's worse, the message itself, or the fact that someone hijacked it just to tell me that. I looked at the door. I don't remember locking it. I've been repeating those words in my head. Remain calm. Do not attempt to leave your residence. Not a warning, a command. I gripped the microphone tighter, my breath shallow. This isn't a warning, I whispered. It's a death sentence. Because if they wanted us safe, they would have told us why. They would have given instructions, told us what to do next. Instead, they told us to stay where we are, waiting. For what? A final sweep? A controlled purge? A world reset where the survivors are only the ones they chose? Or something worse? I kept thinking about the scientist, about what he said. They don't realize they've changed. Maybe the government isn't trying to contain something. Maybe they're trying to keep something from getting out. And maybe, just maybe, it's already too late. Then I heard it. Not outside. Inside. 3 slow knocks, deep, deliberate. From the other side of the room, the locked side. I held my breath, listened. No footsteps, no movement. Just the weight of silence pressing in on all sides. I turned, my chair creaking beneath me. The studio was small. Just a single door. A single window overlooking a street that should have been busy, but wasn't. And yet, I wasn't alone. Another knock, closer this time. Not on the door, on the wall. I thought about the woman who called in earlier. The one whose son kept saying there was a man in the walls. I thought about the nurse, the missing patients, the people who vanished without a trace. I looked at the wall, and then I saw it. A shadow. Not mine. Something was inside. I stopped breathing. If I made a sound, if I even moved, I was afraid it would know. I kept my eyes on the shadow, my pulse hammering in my ears. Was it moving? Was it listening? The emergency alert kept playing in the background, over and over. Remain calm. Do not attempt to leave your residence. I thought about all the warnings. If they tell you to open the door, don't. If they tell you it's safe, run. They don't realize they've changed. Maybe that's why no one is panicking. Maybe that's why the streets are empty. They think everything is fine. Because maybe whatever this is, it doesn't just change you. It makes sure you don't know. The shadow shifted, turned, and then I heard my own voice whispering back at me. I can't explain it. I don't want to. Because if I say it out loud, it becomes real. But I know what I heard. My voice, but not me. A perfect copy, an echo slithering from the other side of the room. It whispered the words I'd just spoken seconds before. This isn't a warning. It's a death sentence. I clenched my hands, digging nails into my palms, willing myself to wake up. But I was already awake. Then the whisper changed. New words. You were never supposed to notice. I reached for the power switch, my fingers trembling. I couldn't let it keep talking. The studio lights flickered. Remain calm. Do not attempt to leave your residence. The whisper came again. You are not alone. Then the transmission cut to static. The broadcast is over. The radio hums with empty static, the kind that lingers long after the voice is gone, the kind that makes you think something else is still listening, somewhere. In a locked room, a chair sits empty. A microphone still warm, a door stands half open, and the only thing left is silence. But listen closely, because if you wait long enough, if you really listen, you might hear it. A whisper, repeating your own words back to you. As we wrap up today's broadcast, I want to leave you with this thought. Despite the darkness we've faced, despite everything we've lost, there's still hope. We're still here. And as long as we keep moving forward, keep building, keep remembering each other, we're not truly lost. No matter what the world looks like around us, there's always something worth fighting for, always something worth remembering. So let's keep going, together. Even when things feel uncertain, remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together. We might not have the past, but we have today. And that's enough to make tomorrow worth living for. Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this broadcast, if it helped you feel connected, or maybe just a little less alone, please do me a favor. Like this video, share it with others, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to us, and if you want to hear more of these daily broadcasts, you can also support us by clicking the join button on our channel. Every bit of your support helps us keep going, keep sharing, and keep telling the stories that matter. Until next time, keep safe, keep strong, and remember, even in the silence, we are still here, you're still here, and that's all we need to keep moving forward. See you soon.